Did anyone ever tell you you're the most useless old man they've ever met? The words landed harder than the crystal glass that struck the dining table a heartbeat later. The laughter died instantly. Forks stopped halfway to waiting mouths. Even the soft country music drifting from the kitchen speaker seemed to shrink beneath the weight of those 12 words. Richard Collins smiled as if he'd just delivered the funniest joke of the evening. He was 38, successful by every visible measure, owner of a growing construction company, proud driver of a brand-new pickup truck parked proudly outside the suburban home, confident enough to believe every opinion he held deserved an audience. Tonight was supposed to celebrate his father-in-law's 72nd birthday. Instead, it had become a trial. Across the dining room sat Samuel Brooks, 72, gray hair neatly combed, a faded denim shirt tucked carefully into pressed khaki pants. The sleeves were rolled exactly twice, revealing weathered forearms marked by countless years beneath sun and wind. His hands rested quietly beside his untouched slice of birthday cake. The candles had already burned themselves into crooked puddles of wax. Samuel didn't move, didn't blink, didn't defend himself. He simply looked at the small flame, still clinging stubbornly to one blackened wick. Silence, he had learned long ago, often revealed more than anger ever could. Richard leaned back in his chair, mistaking that silence for surrender. I mean it, he continued, raising his glass. Look around this room. My wife works. I work. The neighbors work. Everybody contributes. His eyes drifted toward Samuel. And then there's you. Someone shifted uncomfortably. A chair creaked. No one spoke. Emily Brooks, Samuel's daughter and Richard's wife, lowered her eyes toward her plate. She had heard arguments before. Too many. Usually they happened after everyone went home. Never like this. Never with an audience. Richard laughed again. You know what amazes me? He pointed his fork towards Samuel. You spent your whole life doing what exactly? Never became rich. Never started a business. Never made headlines. You live in a tiny house, drive a 20-year-old truck, and spend your mornings fixing fences for neighbors who don't even pay you. He shrugged dramatically. If that's success. He paused just long enough. I'd rather fail. A few nervous chuckles escaped from relatives who immediately regretted them. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. Outside, the summer wind brushed gently through the maple trees lining the backyard. Wind chimes hanging beneath the porch roof answered with soft metallic notes. Samuel listened to them. Their quiet rhythm reminded him of another sound. Rotor blades. Far away. Long ago. He pushed the memory aside before it could fully surface. Not tonight. Emily finally spoke. Richard, her voice barely rose above a whisper. That's enough. No. Richard shook his head. It isn't. For years, everyone keeps treating him like some kind of hero. I've never understood why. He gestured towards Samuel again. Hero? For doing what? Mowing lawns? Repairing mailboxes? Feeding stray dogs? He laughed once more. If that's all it takes, half this town deserves a parade. The words hung heavily over the birthday table. Samuel slowly reached for his coffee mug. His fingers trembled, not from fear but from age. He took one careful sip, set the mug back exactly where it had been. The porcelain clicked softly against the wooden table. It was the loudest sound in the room. Richard stared, irritated. Are you even listening? Samuel looked up. His pale blue eyes remained remarkably calm. I am. Then say something. Another pause. Not forced. Not theatrical. Simply patient. Finally, Samuel spoke. I'm sorry you feel that way. Nothing more. No defense. No accusation. No raised voice. Just quiet acceptance. For reasons Richard couldn't explain, those 6 words irritated him far more than any argument could have. You always do this. What? This? Richard waved his hand impatiently. This silent act. You think staying quiet makes you wise. It doesn't. It just proves you have nothing worth saying. Across the table, 12-year-old Lily Brooks stared at her grandfather. She adored him. He had taught her how to fish, how to repair a bicycle chain, how to identify birds simply by listening. He never shouted, Never lied. Never promised anything he couldn't do. She couldn't understand why her father seemed to hate him so much. Grandpa simply smiled at her. A small smile, barely noticeable, the kind meant only for one person. Lily returned it. Richard noticed. His irritation deepened. You know what? He stood. Chair legs scraped harshly across hardwood. I've been wanting to say this for years. He picked up the birthday card lying beside the cake. Gold lettering. Happy birthday, Dad. He held it up. This. He dropped it carelessly onto the table. Is pretend. We keep pretending you're someone important. But you're not. You're just. He searched for the cruelest phrase he could find. A useless old man everyone feels sorry for. The sentence echoed through the dining room. Emily covered her mouth. An elderly aunt quietly wiped away a tear. Even Richard's own teenage son looked away in embarrassment. Samuel remained perfectly still. Years earlier, insults like these might have found a place inside him. Years earlier. Not anymore. He had survived things far louder than cruel words. He had buried friends whose final breaths disappeared beneath thunder no human voice could ever match. Compared to that, this was only noise. He slowly reached beneath his chair, lifted an old canvas jacket folded neatly over the backrest. The jacket had been repaired countless times. Every stitch was deliberate. Every patch matched the faded fabric almost perfectly. Nothing about it invited attention. He slipped one arm through, then the other. Richard scoffed. There you go. Running away. Samuel buttoned only the middle button. Old habit. He reached into his pocket, checked that a worn leather wallet was still there. Its edges had darkened with decades of use. Inside rested a tarnished silver badge wrapped carefully in soft cloth. He hadn't looked at it in years. He rarely needed to. Some memories didn't require proof. He placed his weathered baseball cap gently onto his head, not because he wanted to leave, because staying would only deepen his daughter's pain. Emily stood abruptly. Dad, you don't have to go. Samuel smiled again, this time for her. It's all right. No birthday is worth arguing over. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. He reached over and squeezed her hand. I've had enough birthdays to know tomorrow always comes. Then he turned toward Richard. For the first time that evening, their eyes met fully. There was no anger in Samuel's gaze, no resentment, only quiet disappointment. I hope one day, he said softly, life gives you something more valuable than success. Richard folded his arms. What's that supposed to mean? Samuel answered while opening the front door. Perspective. The evening breeze drifted inside, warm, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant rain. Samuel stepped onto the porch. Behind him, the door closed gently. No Islam, no drama, only a soft click. Inside the dining room, no one spoke. Outside, Samuel descended the porch steps slowly, one hand resting briefly on the railing. The gravel beneath his boots produced a familiar crunch. He paused beside his aging pickup truck, ran his fingers across the weathered paint, then looked toward the darkening sky. Far across town, a sheriff's patrol SUV rolled quietly out of the county administration building. Its emergency lights remained off. The driver had just received an unexpected phone call. A single sentence, one name, and everything about his evening had suddenly changed. Samuel Brooks never drove away angry. He had abandoned anger decades earlier, somewhere between the sound of sirens and the smell of gunpowder. The old pickup eased away from the curb with a tired growl. Its faded blue paint had surrendered years ago to scratches, rust, and relentless summers beneath the Oklahoma sun. The engine complained with every shift, yet it never failed to start. Much like the man behind the wheel. He didn't turn on the radio. Silence had always been better company. The last orange streaks of daylight stretched across the windshield as he guided the truck through familiar streets. Children chased bicycles across quiet neighborhoods. A couple watered flowers in front of their porch. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower hummed its final pass before sunset. Normal sounds. Peaceful sounds. The kind of sounds Samuel had spent most of his life protecting. His hands rested lightly on the worn steering wheel. The knuckles were swollen from age. The scars across the back of his left hand had faded into pale, silver lines. Most people assumed they came from farm work. He never corrected them. A red traffic light stopped him outside Miller's grocery. Mrs. Henderson was struggling to load several heavy bags into the trunk of her sedan. Before she even noticed him, Samuel had already parked. He walked over quietly. "Evening, Martha." The elderly woman smiled immediately. "Thumb. I told my grandson I'd manage." Samuel lifted every grocery bag as if they weighed nothing. Fresh vegetables, dog food, laundry detergent, a birthday cake. "You spoil that great-granddaughter," Samuel said with a gentle smile. Mrs. Henderson laughed. "And you spoil every person in this town." He only shrugged. "I've got strong arms. You've got a stronger heart." She reached into her purse. "At least let me give you something." Samuel stepped back before she could offer a bill. "You've paid me enough." "I haven't paid you anything." You smiled. "That's usually enough." She shook her head, watching him return to his truck. "One of these days," she called after him, "you're going to let somebody help you." Samuel tipped his cap without looking back. Maybe. Neither of them believed it. 15 minutes later, he turned onto a narrow gravel road outside town. His house appeared exactly where it had stood for nearly 40 years. White paint peeling gently from the wooden siding. A wraparound porch. A porch swing worn smooth by countless evenings. An American flag fluttered quietly beside the front steps. Not oversized, not theatrical, just respectfully maintained. Beside the porch rested an old golden retriever named Duke. The dog lifted his gray muzzle before struggling to his feet. His tail wagged slowly. Age had caught them both. Samuel knelt with obvious effort. "There you are, old boy." Duke pressed his head against Samuel's shoulder. No excitement, no barking, just recognition, the kind only time could build. Samuel scratched behind the dog's ears. "You still guarding the place?" The old dog sighed happily. "I figured you were." Together, they climbed the porch, one careful step at a time. Inside, the house reflected its owner. Simple, orderly, nothing expensive, nothing unnecessary. A wooden dining table polished by decades of family meals. Shelves lined with well-used books. Black and white photographs framed neatly along one hallway. Most showed fishing trips, community picnics, school graduations. None displayed medals. None showed uniforms. None revealed the chapters Samuel had deliberately closed. He removed his boots near the front door, hung his faded jacket carefully beside another one that looked even older. Its fabric had long since lost its color. One sleeve bore a small stitched repair made by his late wife. He touched that stitch every evening. Tonight was no different. Still holding together, he murmured. Whether he meant the jacket or himself, even he wasn't sure. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh coffee. Samuel poured another cup. No sugar, no cream. Exactly as he'd preferred it for half a century. He carried it toward the living room. The walls there told a quieter story. One photograph showed a young Emily sitting on his shoulders at a county fair. Another captured her first day of school, then her college graduation, her wedding. He stopped there. Richard smiled proudly in the wedding picture. Samuel remembered shaking the young man's hand that day. Firm grip, confident eyes, big dreams. Back then, Richard had thanked him. Repeatedly. "You raised an incredible daughter." Samuel had believed him. People changed. Sometimes success polished the outside while quietly eroding the inside. He set the picture back exactly where it belonged. No bitterness, only sadness. A knock interrupted the silence. 3 gentle taps. Samuel already knew who it would be. He opened the door to find 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez holding a broken fishing rod. The boy looked embarrassed. "Mr. Brooks? I think I messed it up." Samuel glanced at the snap guide ring. "It happens. I was casting too hard." Samuel smiled. "That usually means you were trying to impress the fish." Tommy laughed. "My dad says you're the only person who can fix these." "I'm not, but I'm nearby." He invited the boy into the workshop behind the house. The room smelled of cedar wood, machine oil, and old leather. Every tool had its place. Every shelf was labeled. Nothing looked modern. Nothing looked neglected. Samuel examined the rod beneath a hanging work light. "You know why fishing rods break?" Tommy shrugged. Bad luck. No. Samuel reached for a replacement guide. They break because people think strength beats patience. He threaded fresh line through the eyelet with remarkably steady fingers. Same thing happens to people. The boy watched every movement. My dad says you can fix almost anything. Samuel chuckled softly. No, I've just had more practice breaking things first. Within 10 minutes, the rod looked new again. Tommy reached into his pocket. My mom gave me $10. Samuel gently folded the bill back into the child's hand. Buy worms. The boy grinned. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. After he left, the workshop fell silent again. Samuel stood alone beneath the single overhead light. His eyes drifted toward an old wooden cabinet in the corner. Locked, dust resting thickly across its surface. He hadn't opened it in nearly 15 years. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he unlocked it. Inside rested a small leather box. Nothing fancy, just scar-brown leather softened by time. He lifted it carefully onto the workbench. The hinges creaked as he opened the lid. A tarnished silver sheriff's badge lay wrapped inside a folded handkerchief. Beside it rested a faded newspaper clipping. The headline had yellowed beyond easy reading. Only one sentence remained clearly visible. Local deputy saves missing child after hours-long standoff. Samuel looked at the photograph beneath the headline. A much younger version of himself stood beside a frightened little boy wrapped in a blanket. The child's face was barely visible. But Samuel remembered those terrified eyes. He remembered carrying him through smoke. He remembered promising the boy everything would be all right. He also remembered making one quiet request afterward. No ceremony. No interviews. No medals. Just let the kid go home. The sheriff at the time had honored that request. So had everyone else. Eventually, the town forgot. Samuel preferred it that way. He closed the leather box, locked the cabinet again. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the dark horizon. Not a storm. Not yet. Only a warning. Across town, inside the county sheriff's office, Sheriff Daniel Carter stood frozen beside his desk. His phone remained pressed against his ear. On the other end, an emotional voice had just finished telling him exactly what had happened during Samuel Brooks' birthday dinner. Daniel didn't speak for several long seconds. Then he quietly asked one question. Are you absolutely certain it was Samuel Brooks? The answer came immediately. Yes, Sheriff. Daniel slowly closed his eyes. A memory he'd carried since childhood suddenly returned with crystal clarity. Smoke, fire, strong arms lifting him through a broken window, and one calm voice whispering, I've got you, son. The sheriff opened his eyes. His expression had changed completely. Get 2 deputies ready. We're leaving now. The dispatcher hesitated. Emergency? Daniel reached for his campaign hat. His voice was calm, steady, filled with a respect few people had ever heard. No, we're going to repay a debt that's been overdue for 35 years. The following morning arrived quietly. Golden sunlight spilled across the weathered porch of Samuel Brooks' little farmhouse, painting long shadows across the old wooden floorboards. The coffee was already brewing. It always was before sunrise. Samuel believed mornings deserved silence before words. Duke, the aging golden retriever, lifted his head as Samuel stepped outside, carrying 2 mugs. One for himself, one that had remained untouched every morning for nearly 8 years. He placed the second mug on the small table beside the porch swing, exactly where his wife, Eleanor, had always sat. The coffee would eventually grow cold. He never minded. Some habits were promises that survived the people who made them. Samuel lowered himself onto the swing with the careful movements of a man whose body remembered every passing year. The chains creaked. Softly, birds sang somewhere beyond the fence line. A light breeze stirred the American flag beside the porch. Another peaceful morning, just the way he liked it. Then his phone vibrated. An old flip phone. No fancy ringtone. Only a short buzz. The screen displayed one name. Emily. Samuel answered immediately. Morning, sweetheart. There was silence. Then a quiet voice. Dad. She was crying. He closed his eyes. Not because he was surprised. because he had expected the call all night. I'm so sorry. You shouldn't apologize. I invited you. You invited me because you love me. Another pause. I should have stopped him. Samuel smiled to himself. No, you shouldn't have had to. Emily wiped away another tear. He said horrible things. I've heard worse. I know. No, you don't. The words escaped before Samuel realized he'd spoken them. He rarely hinted at the life that had come before. Emily noticed. Dad, what happened before? Samuel looked toward the rising sun. Memories stood just beyond the edge of consciousness like distant mountains beneath morning fog. I've lived long enough to know people sometimes say things they don't mean. But Richard meant them. Samuel didn't answer, because she was right. Instead, he changed the subject. How are the kids? Lily won't stop asking about you. Tommy too. I'll see them soon. Emily hesitated. Dad, I don't think Richard wants you coming back. Samuel's expression never changed. I wasn't planning to. The sentence broke her heart. Dad, it's all right. No, it isn't. It feels like I've failed you. Samuel leaned back slowly. The porch swing groaned gently beneath him. You've never failed me. I married the wrong man. No, you married the man he was. People change. Sometimes they become kinder. Sometimes they become harder. Neither happens overnight. Emily sniffled quietly. I miss Mom. So do I. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Two people sharing grief, separated by 20 miles of quiet country roads. Finally, Samuel said softly, Tell Lily I'll still take her fishing Saturday. Emily laughed through her tears. You really think she'll let you cancel? I wouldn't dare. They ended the call. Samuel slipped the phone back into his pocket, then sat silently watching sunlight spread across the fields. He hoped Richard would eventually understand something age had taught him. Respect demanded by pride never lasted. Respect earned through character rarely needed words. Across town, Richard Collins slammed his truck door harder than necessary. The construction site buzzed with activity. Power saw screamed. Forklifts rumbled. Workers unloaded stacks of lumber beneath a cloudless sky. Richard walked confidently through the noise. Employees greeted him. Morning, boss. He nodded without slowing. His foreman, Mike Jensen, caught up beside him. You okay? Richard frowned. Why? You seem... Mike searched for a careful word. Agitated. I'm Fina. Mike didn't push. Everyone knew when Richard's temper surfaced. It was better to let it burn itself out. Still, news traveled quickly in a small town, especially news involving family. By lunchtime, 3 different subcontractors had quietly discussed what happened at Samuel's birthday dinner. Not because they enjoyed gossip, because almost everyone knew Samuel Brooks. The old man sharpened lawn-mower blades without charging, fixed broken gates for widows, delivered groceries during snowstorms, spent Christmas mornings helping the church kitchen. No one could remember him raising his voice. No one. Richard noticed conversations stopping whenever he walked near. He hated that. They're overreacting, he muttered. Mike looked puzzled. Who? My family. The whole town. I just told the truth. Mike remained silent for a moment. Finally, he asked, You really believe your father-in-law's useless? Richard shrugged. What has he actually accomplished? Mike stared at him, then slowly removed his work gloves. You remember when my youngest almost died? Richard nodded. The allergic reaction? Yeah. The ambulance couldn't reach us because the bridge washed out. Richard frowned. What about it? It was your father-in-law who drove through floodwater to get my son across. Richard blinked. I never knew that. He never told you? No. Mike smiled sadly. He never told anybody. Richard looked away. One uncomfortable story wasn't enough to change his opinion. There had to be more, didn't there? Meanwhile, at the county animal shelter, volunteer coordinator Janet Lewis watched Samuel repairing a broken kennel gate. He worked carefully, patiently, measuring twice, cutting once. A young volunteer smiled. Mr. Brooks, you don't have to keep doing this for free. Samuel tightened one final bolt. The gate swung perfectly. I know. So why do you? He looked toward an elderly Labrador lying peacefully in the shade. Because they can't ask. The volunteer smiled. You always have the strangest answers. Samuel chuckled. My wife used to say the same thing. He gathered his tools into the old canvas bag. The leather handles were cracked from decades of use. Inside lay only ordinary equipment. A hammer, several screwdrivers, a measuring tape. Nothing expensive, nothing unusual. Janet watched him leave. Another volunteer approached. Who is he? Janet shrugged. Honestly, I don't think anyone really knows. At almost the exact same moment, Sheriff Daniel Carter parked outside the County Historical Society. He wasn't there to investigate a crime. He was searching for history. Specifically, one man, the elderly archivist, looked up as Daniel entered. Sheriff, what can I do for you? I'm looking for records. What kind? Daniel removed his hat respectfully. Deputy Samuel Brooks. The archivist frowned thoughtfully. That's a name I haven't heard in years. He disappeared into the storage room. Dust floated lazily through narrow beams of sunlight. Cardboard boxes lined forgotten shelves. Old newspapers, retirement plaques, yellowed personnel files. After several minutes, the archivist returned carrying a weathered archive box. He placed it carefully onto the table. You won't find much. He never liked publicity. Daniel slowly lifted the lid. Inside, one faded deputy badge, several commendation letters, a newspaper clipping, and one sealed envelope. Across its front, someone had handwritten only 4 words. Open only if necessary. Daniel's heartbeat slowed. Very carefully, he opened the envelope. Inside rested a single handwritten letter from the sheriff who had served before him. He began reading. With every line, his expression became more solemn, more respectful. By the final paragraph, Daniel quietly lowered the paper. The archivist noticed. What is it? Daniel looked toward the old American flag hanging in the corner of the room. His voice barely rose above a whisper. This town has spent 35 years honoring the wrong heroes. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the envelope, then reached for his radio. Dispatch. Go ahead, Sheriff. I've located Mr. Brooks. Good. Daniel placed his campaign hat firmly back on his head. I don't want lights. I don't want sirens. I want every deputy who comes with me to arrive in dress uniform. There was a long pause over the radio. Then the dispatcher quietly asked, Is this an official ceremony? Daniel looked once more at Samuel's faded personnel photograph. The young deputy in the picture wasn't smiling. His eyes carried the same calm strength they still held today. Daniel answered softly, No, it's something far more important. It's gratitude. He turned toward the door. Outside, dark clouds were beginning to gather over the county. Not enough to stop the day, just enough to remind anyone paying attention that even the clearest skies could change without warning. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of brushed steel. Heavy clouds drifted lazily over Oak Ridge County, muting the summer sun and wrapping the town in an unusual stillness. Samuel Brooks didn't notice. He was kneeling beside the fence of the old Wilson farm, replacing a weather-beaten post that had finally surrendered after 30 years of wind and rain. The post belonged to Margaret Wilson, 81 years old, widowed, living alone since her husband passed away 6 winters earlier. She stood on the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea. You've already fixed enough around here this month, Sam. Samuel drove another nail into place. It wasn't enough. It was, You repair my porch, my mailbox, my chicken coop, and now this. She sighed. You'll never send me a bill. Samuel smiled without looking up. If I send you a bill, you'll insist on paying it. I would. So neither of us wins. Margaret laughed. You've always been impossible. Samuel brushed the sawdust from his hands. I learned from stubborn people. She handed him the glass of tea. He accepted it with both hands. The ice clinked softly against the glass. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. That was one of the reasons Samuel enjoyed coming here. Margaret understood silence. She didn't try to fill every pause. Finally, she asked quietly, Emily called me this morning. Samuel looked toward the fence. I figured she might. You know, the whole town is talking. They'll stop. They won't. He shrugged. They always do. Margaret studied his face carefully. I've known you 43 years. You've never once defended yourself. Samuel took another sip. No. Why? He looked across the open pasture where a pair of horses grazed peacefully. When people already believe the worst about you, words rarely change their minds. And if they don't, they eventually discover the truth. She smiled gently. That's Eleanor talking. He smiled too. My wife usually had better answers than I did. 20 miles away, Sheriff Daniel Carter sat alone inside his office. The archive box remained open across his desk. The handwritten letter lay beside it. He had read it 4 times. Each reading uncovered another detail, another sacrifice, another act of quiet courage that had somehow disappeared beneath the weight of passing years. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Come. Deputy Lisa Morales stepped inside. She had served under Daniel for nearly 12 years. If we're leaving soon, she asked, I should know what this is about. Daniel nodded toward the chair. Seat. She did. He pushed a faded newspaper clipping across the desk. She studied it. Deputy rescues missing child during armed standoff. I remember hearing about that. Daniel nodded. Everyone remembers the headline. No one remembers the ending. Lisa frowned. What do you mean? Daniel reached for the old letter. The child wasn't supposed to survive. The suspect had already threatened to kill him. The state tactical team was still 40 minutes away. Lisa looked up. So what happened? Daniel's eyes drifted toward the rain-speckled window. Samuel Brooks ignored orders. He went in alone. 35 years earlier, the abandoned farmhouse stood surrounded by waist-high weeds. Police cruisers formed a loose perimeter. Their red and blue lights flashed helplessly against the darkness. Rain poured relentlessly. Inside the farmhouse, a frightened 6-year-old boy sat tied to a wooden chair, his face streaked with tears. Across from him stood a desperate kidnapper gripping a revolver with trembling hands. Outside, the sheriff barked into a radio. Nobody goes in until SWAT arrives. Every deputy understood. Every deputy obeyed. Except one. Deputy Samuel Brooks quietly removed his campaign hat, handed it to another officer. If I don't come back, the young deputy beside him interrupted. Don't. Samuel smiled. Take care of my wife. Without waiting for permission, he disappeared into the rain. No dramatic speech. No heroic pose. Just one man walking toward a house everyone else had been ordered to avoid. Minutes passed. No gunshots. No shouting. Only rain hammering against the roof. Then, one deafening crack echoed across the fields. Every deputy raised their weapons. The sheriff prepared to charge. Before anyone moved, the front door slowly opened. Samuel stepped outside, his shirt soaked with rain, blood running down one sleeve. In his arms, a terrified little boy clung tightly around his neck. The child wasn't crying anymore. Samuel whispered something into the boy's ear. The boy nodded. Only after handing the child safely to waiting paramedics did Samuel collapse onto one knee. A bullet had torn through his shoulder. No one realized he had been hit. Not until then. The flashback dissolved. Lisa Morales sat speechless. That little boy, Daniel finished quietly, was me. The room became completely silent. Lisa stared at her sheriff. I had no idea. Neither did most people. Why? Daniel reached for another document. Samuel Brooks' official commendation. Unsigned. Unclaimed. Attached was a handwritten note. Deputy Brooks respectfully declines. Public ceremony and requests all recognition remain focused on the child and the responding officers. Lisa read it twice, then a third time. He gave away the credit. Daniel nodded. Every bit of it. The newspaper barely mentioned him. The governor wanted to present an award. He refused. The state offered a promotion. He turned it down. Lisa couldn't hide her confusion. Who does that? Daniel smiled faintly. The kind of man who never wanted people to owe him. At that same moment, Samuel loaded the final wooden post into the back of his pickup. Margaret walked him to the truck. You'll come by Sunday? If you'll make that peach pie. I already have. Then I don't have much choice. She hugged him tightly. Take care of yourself. Samuel nodded. You too. As he drove away, neither of them noticed 2 county patrol SUVs parked quietly across the road beneath a grove of oak trees. Their engines remained off. Deputy Lisa Morales lowered her binoculars. That's him. Daniel watched the old pickup disappear down the country road. The windshield wipers squeaked every few seconds as a light rain began to fall. For several moments, the sheriff said nothing. Finally, he whispered, "He still spends his retirement helping everyone." Lisa nodded. "The town thinks he's just a handyman." Daniel's eyes never left the truck. "No, the town sees what he chose to become. They never saw what he gave up." An hour later, Samuel stopped at Riverside Cemetery. Rain fell steadily now. Tiny droplets tapped softly against dozens of weathered headstones. He carried a small bouquet of fresh white lilies. No hombre. He never brought one. Eleanor used to laugh that he was too stubborn to stay dry. He found her grave beneath a large maple tree. The marble stone was simple. Eleanor Brooks' beloved wife, 1949 to 2018. Samuel knelt slowly. His knees protested. His heart didn't. He placed the flowers carefully against the stone. "Happy birthday to me," he said with a quiet smile. "I think you would have laughed at yesterday." The rain answered softly. He sat there for several minutes, talking as though she were still beside him. About Emily, about Lily, about Duke refusing to eat vegetables, about the fence he'd repaired that morning. He never mentioned Richard, not once. Before leaving, he rested one weathered hand against the cool marble. "I miss you." 3 words, barely louder than the rain. As Samuel walked back toward his truck, he failed to notice another vehicle parked quietly beneath the trees. Sheriff Daniel Carter sat behind the wheel. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. He had witnessed the entire moment from a respectful distance. He made no effort to interrupt, no effort to introduce himself. Instead, he removed his campaign hat, placed it respectfully over his heart, and whispered words no one else was there to hear. "I'm alive because of you. You still don't know it." The rain continued to fall, but for the first time in 35 years, Daniel Carter knew exactly how he intended to repay the man who had once carried him out of the fire. And he would begin tomorrow morning. Saturday morning arrived beneath a clear blue sky. The rain from the previous evening had washed every rooftop clean, leaving the small county smelling of wet earth and fresh-cut hay. Samuel Brooks was already awake. He had promised Lily a fishing trip. Promises mattered, especially the small ones. He packed the old tackle box his father had given him more than 50 years earlier. Its green paint had chipped away around the corners. The metal latches squeaked every time they opened. Inside were only the essentials: hooks, sinkers, a faded bobber, a pocket knife sharpened so many times that half its blade had disappeared. Nothing expensive, nothing modern, just enough. Duke followed him slowly toward the pickup before deciding the truck bed looked far too high for old legs. Samuel smiled. "I know, you'd rather supervise from home." The old dog wagged his tail once before settling beneath the porch swing. Samuel scratched behind his ears. "I'll bring you something back." Across town, Richard Collins hadn't slept well. Every conversation from the birthday dinner replayed in his mind. Not because he regretted what he'd said. At least, that was what he kept telling himself. It was everyone else's reaction that unsettled him. His wife's tears, his daughter's silence, the awkward expressions from relatives. Even Mike Jensen's story at the construction site refused to leave his thoughts. Why did everyone seem to know things about Samuel that he didn't? His phone vibrated. It was his business partner. "Morning. You coming?" Richard frowned. "Coming where?" "The Chamber of Commerce breakfast." "You forgot." Richard cursed under his breath. "I'll be there." 20 minutes later, he entered the Oak Ridge Community Hall. The room buzzed with conversation. Business owners, teachers, firefighters, county officials. Richard poured himself a cup of coffee and joined a table near the front. As he sat down, he noticed an elderly man struggling with a heavy folding chair. Before Richard could react, someone else stepped in. Samuel. He had apparently come to help set up the charity breakfast before taking Lily fishing. Richard froze. His father-in-law smiled warmly at the elderly volunteer. "Easy now. We've only got one back between us." The old man laughed. "You've still got 2 better knees than I do." Together they arranged another row of tables. No one ordered Samuel to help. He simply noticed work that needed doing. Within minutes, several younger volunteers unconsciously began following his rhythm. Without raising his voice, without giving instructions, he somehow organized the entire room. Richard watched in silence. Then something strange happened. People kept walking over, not to ask for favors, to greet Samuel. "Morning, Sam. Thanks again for fixing my porch. My grandson loved the fishing rod. Mary's roses are blooming because of your irrigation idea. You still coming to the school fundraiser?" Each conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Samuel smiled, answered briefly, then returned to moving tables. He never lingered, never accepted praise. Richard frowned. How had he never noticed this before? Near the stage, Mayor Helen Foster approached Samuel carrying a clipboard. Thumb. He looked up. "Morning, Mayor. You still volunteering at the Veterans Food Drive next month?" "If you'll have me." She laughed. "You've been running it for 12 years. I mostly carry boxes. You also convinced half the town to donate." Samuel shrugged. "They're generous people." "No." She smiled knowingly. "They trust you." Richard overheard every word. Something inside him shifted. Only slightly, but enough to make him uncomfortable. Just then, the hall doors opened. Sheriff Daniel Carter entered with Deputy Lisa Morales. Neither wore ceremonial uniforms, just their standard patrol attire. Daniel scanned the room once. His eyes immediately found Samuel. For a brief moment, the sheriff simply stood there, watching. A quiet smile crossed his face. Lisa noticed. "That's him." Daniel nodded. The same posture, the same calm. 35 years. It hasn't changed. Lisa asked quietly, "Do you want to speak to him now?" Daniel looked around the crowded room. "No, not yet. He deserves privacy." Instead, they joined the breakfast line like everyone else. Samuel never noticed them. Meanwhile, Lily burst through the front doors. "Grandpa!" Samuel turned just in time to catch the 12-year-old as she wrapped both arms around him. "I thought you forgot." "I forgot my keys, my wallet, my doctor's appointment." He smiled. "But never you." She grinned. "I brought worms." Samuel laughed. Then today's officially serious. Richard watched the exchange. His daughter adored the old man. She looked happier with him than she had looked around Richard all week. That realization stung more than he expected. Lily took Samuel's hand. "Can we leave now?" "In a few minutes. I promised Mrs. Turner I'd carry these food boxes first." "I'll help." Together, they began unloading canned goods from a pickup truck. Within minutes, grandfather and granddaughter had organized dozens of volunteers without saying much at all. Lily copied everything Samuel did. She greeted everyone politely. She carried boxes without complaining. She thanked every volunteer. Richard noticed. Those habits hadn't come from him. They had come from Samuel. An hour later, the fishing lake shimmered beneath bright sunshine. The water was almost perfectly still. Samuel and Lily sat quietly at the end of an old wooden dock. Neither spoke for several minutes. Fishing wasn't about talking. It was about waiting. Finally, Lily broke the silence. "Dad was mean." Samuel kept watching the bobber. He was angry. "Why?" "I don't know. You aren't useless." Samuel smiled gently. "What makes you so sure?" She looked genuinely confused. "Because everybody smiles when you show up." He looked at her. Children rarely complicated the truth. "You know," Lily continued, "my teacher says success means making a difference." Samuel nodded. "She's a smart teacher. I think you already won." His chest tightened. Not because of pride, because Eleanor would have loved hearing those words. "You sound like your grandmother." "I hope that's good." "It is. It's the highest compliment I know." The bobber dipped beneath the surface. Lily gasped. "I got one." Samuel laughed. "No, you earned one." Together they reeled in a small base. Neither noticed the black county SUV parked quietly beneath nearby trees. Sheriff Daniel Carter remained inside, watching from a respectful distance. Lisa glanced sideways. "You followed him all morning." "I'm learning." "What?" Daniel smiled faintly. "The measure of a man." Lisa looked toward the lake. Samuel had just released the fish instead of keeping it. Lily clapped happily. Daniel spoke almost to himself. Heroes don't stop serving. They simply stop wearing uniforms. That afternoon, as Samuel and Lily packed their gear, a frantic scream shattered the peaceful air. Help! Someone pointed toward the far end of the lake. A little boy, no older than 6, had wandered onto an unstable section of an old fishing pier. The rotten boards gave way beneath him. He disappeared into the dark water. His mother screamed. People froze. So pulled out phones. Others shouted conflicting instructions. No one moved. Samuel had already dropped the tackle box. His hat fell onto the dock. His boots hit the ground at a run. For 72 years old, he moved with startling purpose. Every step economical. Every decision immediate. Without hesitation, he dove into the lake. The splash echoed across the shoreline. Sheriff Daniel Carter's expression changed instantly. He threw open the SUV door and sprinted toward the water. But even before he reached the shoreline, he already knew. The old man who had once carried a frightened child out of a burning farmhouse had just done exactly the same thing again. Only this time, an entire town was watching. The lake fell silent. Not completely. There were still cries, still splashing water, still the frantic voice of a terrified mother calling her son's name. But to Sheriff Daniel Carter, everything seemed strangely distant. His eyes were fixed on one man, Samuel Brooks. The 72-year-old disappeared beneath the dark water without hesitation. No calculación, no panique, just instinct. The same instinct that had once carried a frightened 6-year-old out of a burning farmhouse 35 years earlier. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had seen body camera footage, officer rescues, training simulations, hostage recoveries. But this wasn't duty. Samuel no longer wore a badge. No one expected him to jump. No one would have blamed him if he hadn't. Yet he had moved before anyone else even understood what was happening. Because that was who he was. Call EMS. Deputy Lisa Morales shouted as she sprinted toward the shoreline. Several deputies immediately reached for their radios. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Child in the water. Lake Harrison. Rescue in progress. Daniel ignored the radio traffic. He reached the dock just as bubbles erupted beside the broken pier. A second later, Samuel surfaced, one arm wrapped firmly around the little boy, the other cut steadily through the water. The child was unconscious. Samuel kept the boy's face above the surface with practiced precision. Easy. His voice remained calm. So easy. He kicked toward the shoreline. Daniel waded into the lake without removing his boots. Together, the sheriff and the old man carried the boy onto the muddy bank. The mother collapsed beside her son. Oh God, no. My baby. Samuel immediately knelt. His soaked denim shirt clung to his shoulders. Water streamed from his gray hair. He gently checked the boy's airway. 2 fingers against the neck. A quick glance at the chest. Then he began compressions. Every movement exact. Controlled. Unhurried. Daniel watched carefully. Those weren't the actions of someone who had watched online videos. Those were the hands of a man who had done this before. Many times. Brett, son? Samuel whispered. You still got time. 30 compressions. 2 rescue breaths. Again. 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 Around them, more than 50 people stood frozen. Nobody spoke. Nobody filmed anymore. The phones had slowly lowered. The moment had become too real. Then, the little boy coughed violently. Water burst from his lungs. He gasped. His mother cried out and wrapped both arms around him. Paramedics arrived seconds later. They took over quickly. One of them looked towards Samuel. Who started CPR? The mother pointed immediately. He did. The paramedic glanced down at the child, then back at Samuel. You probably saved his life. Samuel simply nodded. I'm glad we got him back. He quietly stepped aside, as though his part was finished, as though he had merely repaired another broken fence. Daniel stared at him, still dripping lake water, still breathing hard, yet already trying to disappear into the crowd. Exactly like the archive files described. Exactly like every story he had uncovered. Samuel never stayed for applause. He never waited for recognition. He simply served and left. Not today. Daniel removed his campaign hat. Lisa noticed immediately. So this is it. Daniel nodded. It's long overdue. He walked slowly across the muddy shoreline. Every deputy instinctively followed. The growing crowd parted without being asked. Whispers spread quietly. Why is the sheriff? What's happening? Is something wrong? Richard Collins had arrived only minutes earlier after receiving a frantic phone call from Emily. He pushed through the crowd. His clothes were still dusty from work. He stopped when he saw Samuel sitting quietly on a weathered picnic bench, wringing water from his cap. The old man looked exhausted. Nothing more. Richard opened his mouth. No words came. He had just watched the man he called useless dive into deep water without thinking twice. For a stranger, Daniel stopped 3 feet in front of Samuel. Neither man spoke. Samuel looked up. Recognition flickered across his face. Not because he knew the sheriff, because he recognized the eyes. Blue, steady, familiar somehow. Daniel swallowed hard. His voice almost failed him. Sir, Samuel stood politely. You must be the sheriff. Daniel nodded. Daniel Carter. Samuel extended his hand. It's nice to meet you. Daniel looked at the offered hand. For a long moment, he couldn't take it. Instead, he stepped backward, straightened his uniform, placed his campaign hat beneath his left arm. Every deputy behind him instantly stood at attention. The chatter around the lake vanished. Daniel slowly raised his right hand. A perfect law enforcement salute. Sharp, precise, unwavering. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard stared in disbelief. Emily covered her mouth. Lily looked from her grandfather to the sheriff, completely confused. Samuel himself looked equally surprised. Sheriff, Daniel's voice trembled. My name probably means nothing to you, but 35 years ago, I was 6 years old. Samuel's brow furrowed slightly. Daniel continued. There was a farmhouse, a fire, a man with a gun. For just an instant, Samuel's expression changed. The memory returned. Then, smoke. A terrified child, little hands gripping his neck. You? Daniel smiled through moist eyes. I am Denny. The name landed like distant thunder. Samuel blinked once. Then again, the frightened little boy, the one he had carried through flames, now stood before him wearing the sheriff's star. My goodness, Samuel whispered. You got big. Laughter mixed with quiet tears swept through the crowd. Daniel could no longer hold back his emotions. You saved my life. You gave me back to my mother. You gave me the chance to grow up. My first baseball game. My graduation. My wedding. My children. My badge. He paused. His voice cracked. I've lived every single day because you chose to walk into that house. The sheriff completed his salute. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, every deputy behind him raised their hands in perfect unison. 8 deputies, 1 sergeant, 1 lieutenant, 10 salutes, directed toward one quiet old man, standing in soaked work clothes. No medes, no speech, no ceremony, only respect, absolute, unquestionable. The lake fell completely silent. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His mind replayed every cruel word spoken at the birthday table. You're useless. You've never accomplished anything. You're nobody. Each sentence now sounded unbearable, because standing before him wasn't a forgotten old man. It was someone an entire sheriff's department considered worthy of their highest respect. Daniel lowered his salute slowly. His next words carried across the silent shoreline. For 35 years, I've waited for the chance to thank you. And today, he glanced toward the rescued little boy, now safely inside the ambulance. You saved another child, just like before. Only this time, there were hundreds of witnesses. And for the first time in his life, Samuel Brooks could no longer hide the legacy he had spent decades trying to bury. No one moved. The lake seemed to have forgotten the wind. Even the American flag above the small ranger station hung almost perfectly still, as though the afternoon itself refused to interrupt the moment unfolding along the shoreline. Sheriff Daniel Carter slowly lowered his salute. Behind him, every deputy remained at attention. Their polished badges reflected the afternoon sun. Not one of them shifted their weight. Not one lowered their eyes. The silence had become a language all its own. Samuel Brooks looked from one face to another. His weathered expression remained calm, but there was something unfamiliar in his eyes. Embarrassment, not pride. He had spent 35 years making sure moments like this never happened. Now, there was nowhere to hide. "Sheriff," Samuel said quietly, "you don't owe me this." Daniel smiled. "Yes, sir. Edo." Samuel shook his head gently. "I only did my job." Daniel's voice became firmer. "No, you did far more than that." Richard Collins stood motionless several yards away. His breathing felt strangely shallow. He had expected something. Maybe Samuel had once served as a deputy. Maybe he'd receive an award. Maybe people exaggerated old stories. But this, an entire sheriff's department saluting one retired old man. That wasn't respect born from nostalgia. It was respect earned through sacrifice. His daughter Lily slowly walked toward him. "Dad." Richard looked down. Her eyes were filled with confusion. "You said Grandpa never did anything important?" Richard couldn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, because for the first time in years, he honestly didn't know what to say. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his uniform. He removed the faded newspaper clipping from the archive box. The edges had turned brittle with age. He handed it carefully to Samuel. Samuel looked down. Recognition immediately softened his face. "I haven't seen this in years." Daniel smiled. "I found it yesterday." Samuel quietly chuckled. "I thought they'd thrown it away." They almost did. He unfolded the clipping. There he was, 35 years younger, carrying a frightened little boy wrapped in a blanket. His own shoulders stained dark with blood. Samuel sighed softly. "I remember the photographer. He kept asking me to look at the camera. I wouldn't." Daniel nodded. "You were looking at me." Samuel smiled. "I wanted to make sure you were breathing." Lisa Morales stepped forward carrying another item, a worn leather folder. She opened it carefully. Inside rested the official commendation Samuel had declined decades earlier. The paper had yellowed with time. The county seal remained clearly visible. Lisa handed it to Daniel. The sheriff turned it toward the crowd. "I think everyone here deserves to hear this." He cleared his throat, then began reading. Deputy Samuel Brooks entered an armed hostage situation alone after all negotiations had failed. Ignoring overwhelming personal danger, he successfully rescued the child without regard for his own safety. After sustaining a gunshot wound, Deputy Brooks refused immediate treatment until he confirmed the child was unharmed. The crowd stood absolutely still. Daniel continued. Deputy Brooks respectfully declines all public recognition. He requests that the rescued child never feel responsible for the sacrifices made on his behalf. He further requests that no ceremony be held. His exact words were. Daniel paused. He looked directly at Samuel, then finished reading. "If that little boy grows up believing the world still has good people in it, that's all the reward I'll ever need." Silence. No applause. No whispers. Only silence. Richard felt something break inside him. Emily slowly stepped toward her father. Tears streamed freely down her face. "Dad!" She barely recognized her own voice. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Samuel folded the old newspaper carefully. There wasn't much to tell. Emily stared at him. "You saved a child's life. You were shot. You refused an award. You never." Her voice cracked. "You never told me." Samuel reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "You were growing up. You needed a father, not a hero." Emily covered her mouth as fresh tears fell. Every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary weekend, she had lived beside a man whose greatest stories had never been spoken aloud. Not because he had forgotten them, because he believed love was shown through presence, not reputation. Richard finally forced himself forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. He stopped several feet away. Samuel looked at him without anger, without triumph, only quiet patience. Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The words he had prepared, the excuses, the explanations, they all sounded meaningless. Finally, he managed one sentence. His voice failed. Samuel waited. Richard tried again. "I didn't know." Samuel nodded gently. "I know. No." Richard shook his head. "I never asked. That hurt more, because it was true. He had lived with his family for 12 years. He had asked Samuel about investments, politics, home repairs, football, weather, but never once. Tell me about your life. Never once had he cared enough to ask. Daniel looked at Richard. His expression remained professional, but his words carried unmistakable weight. Mr. Collins. Richard turned slowly. Do you know what your father-in-law did after retiring? Richard swallowed. No. He spent 23 years quietly fixing homes for widows. He rebuilt wheelchair ramps, delivered food, paid utility bills anonymously. He created scholarships under other people's names. Richard stared. Daniel continued. When our department needed anonymous donations for children's safety equipment, he was always the first check. He never signed his name. Lisa added quietly, we checked. There were 37 anonymous donations. They all came from him. Samuel sighed. I told you not to dig. Daniel smiled. I couldn't help myself. The crowd looked at Samuel differently now. Not because he had become someone new, because they had finally begun seeing the man who had been standing in front of them all along. The elderly volunteer from the community hall stepped forward. So that's why. Samuel smiled. Why what? You always disappear before anyone can thank you. A few people laughed softly. Another neighbor shook his head. I thought you just liked fixing fences. Edo. Samuel answered honestly. They're easier than fixing people. More laughter. Gentle this time. Warm. Not mocking. Respectful. Then something unexpected happened. The mother of the rescued little boy approached slowly, her son wrapped in a blanket beside her. Without saying a word, she knelt, right there on the grass. Samuel's eyes widened. Mom! She looked up through tears. You gave me my son back. There are no words big enough. Samuel immediately reached down. No, please. He gently helped her to her feet. No parent should ever kneel to me. She whispered, then let me hug you. Samuel smiled. That, I'd be honored to accept. She embraced him tightly. Her little boy wrapped his small arms around Samuel's waist. The old man closed his eyes for just a moment. Another child, another life, another family kept whole. Exactly as it should be. Sheriff Carter quietly looked toward his deputies. It's time. Lisa nodded. Every deputy understood. Because what would happen next would ensure that no one in Oak Ridge County would ever again call Samuel Brooks a useless old man. No one spoke. The breeze returned at last, rippling the surface of Lake Harrison and rustling the oak trees surrounding the shoreline. Yet the silence remained. Not the uncomfortable silence that had filled Samuel's birthday dinner. This silence was different. It carried respect, reflection, regret. Sheriff Daniel Carter slowly stepped beside Samuel. He turned toward the gathering crowd. Nearly 100 people now stood along the lakeshore. Families, deputies, firefighters, paramedics, volunteers, children. Some still held fishing poles. Others clutched half-finished picnic baskets. None of them had expected an ordinary Saturday to become something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Daniel removed his campaign hat once again. His voice carried clearly across the water. Most of you know Mr. Samuel Brooks as the man who fixes fences. A few quiet smiles appeared. You know him as the neighbor who repairs broken lawnmowers. The volunteer who arrives before everyone else. The old gentleman who refuses payment. He paused. But today, I'd like you to know the man behind those simple acts. He nodded toward Deputy Lisa Morales. Lisa opened the worn leather folder once more. This time she removed several photographs. None had ever been displayed publicly. The first showed a young deputy standing beside a patrol cruiser from the late 1980s. Samuel looked barely 35. The same calm eyes, the same quiet posture. The next photograph showed floodwater reaching halfway up a rescue truck. Another showed volunteers rebuilding homes after a tornado. Samuel appeared in every picture, never standing in the center, always working in the background. Daniel smiled. Do you notice something? People leaned closer. No medals, no interviews, no ceremonies. Every photograph was taken by someone else. Because Mr. Brooks never asked for recognition. Richard stared at the images. His heart sank a little deeper with each one. He had lived less than 20 minutes from this man for 12 years. Yet he knew almost nothing about him. Daniel continued. Yesterday, I spent nearly 10 hours reading old county records. I thought I was looking for the story of one rescue. He shook his head. I was wrong. I found a story of an entire lifetime. He lifted another document. This county has records of volunteer work going back almost 3 decades. He looked around the crowd. Would anyone like to guess how many times Samuel Brooks accepted payment? Nobody answered. Daniel smiled gently. Twice. The crowd exchanged puzzled looks. Once because a little girl insisted on paying him with 2 homemade chocolate cookies. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. And once because an elderly widower refused to let him leave without accepting $1. Daniel reached into the folder. Samuel immediately recognized what he was holding. An old, faded $1 bill, folded carefully inside protective plastic. Daniel looked towards Samuel. You kept it. Samuel smiled. He would have been offended if I threw it away. The crowd laughed again, warmer this time. Even Richard couldn't help smiling. Daniel's expression slowly grew serious. But there was something else. He removed a thin stack of financial records. We almost missed these. They were buried in archived tax documents. Samuel sighed quietly. Oh, Daniel. The sheriff looked at him apologetically. I'm sorry. I know you didn't want anyone to know. Samuel rubbed the back of his neck. It's all right. The truth has a way of finding daylight. Daniel nodded. For 21 years, someone anonymously paid school lunch debts for children across Oak Ridge County. A few teachers in the crowd exchanged surprised glances. The donations always arrived by mail. No return address. No signature. Only one handwritten sentence. Daniel unfolded a faded note. He read it aloud. No child should learn on an empty stomach. Several people lowered their heads. Daniel looked up. The handwriting matches Mr. Brooks. Gasps swept through the crowd. Mrs. Evelyn Turner, the elementary school principal, covered her mouth. Oh my goodness. It was you. Samuel shrugged gently. It seemed easier than watching kids go hungry. Mrs. Turner began, crying openly. For years, I tried to find whoever did it. You let me thank the wrong people. Samuel smiled kindly. They needed encouragement too. Richard felt sick. Every news story erased another excuse he had built for himself. He remembered mocking Samuel's old pickup. He remembered laughing about his worn boots. He remembered calling him a burden. He had mistaken simplicity for failure. He had mistaken humility for weakness. Most painfully, he had mistaken silence for emptiness. Lily tugged softly on her father's sleeve. Dad! Richard looked down. Yes. Do you remember when Grandpa fixed my bike? He nodded slowly. He stayed until midnight. I thought he was just being nice. She looked towards Samuel. I think that's just who he is. Richard swallowed hard. You're right. His voice barely escaped his throat. I should have seen it. The paramedic who had treated the rescued boy approached the sheriff. He handed Daniel a clipboard. The child is stable. No water in the lungs. He'll make a full recovery. The mother burst into tears of relief. She looked towards Samuel again. This time, the applause began. One person, then another, then 20, then everyone. Not loud, not wild, steady, sincere, the kind of applause reserved for someone who had never asked to receive it. Samuel looked genuinely uncomfortable. He raised one hand modestly. Please, you really don't have to. But no one stopped. For nearly a full minute, the shoreline echoed with grateful hands. Sheriff Carter waited patiently until the applause faded. Then he turned toward the assembled deputies. Attention! Boot heels struck the ground in perfect unison. The sharp sound echoed across the lake. Daniel spoke with calm authority. Effective immediately. He paused. The Community Service Recognition Program established by this department will no longer carry its current name. Several deputies exchanged curious glances. Daniel smiled. It will now be known as... He looked directly at Samuel. The Samuel Brooks Award. Samuel's eyes widened. No. Daniel nodded. Yes. It will be awarded every year to the citizen who serves this county without expecting anything in return. Samuel shook his head. There are better people. Daniel smiled warmly. I've spent 2 days looking. I couldn't find one. The crowd erupted into another wave of applause. Samuel lowered his head. For the first time that afternoon, his eyes filled with tears. Not because of the award, because Eleanor wasn't there to see it. He quietly whispered beneath his breath, "You would have hated all this attention." Then he smiled, and secretly loved every second. At the edge of the crowd, Richard finally understood something that no amount of money, success, or professional achievement had ever taught him. The richest man in Oak Ridge County wasn't the one with the biggest house. It was the man who had spent a lifetime quietly making everyone else's lives better. And in that painful realization, Richard knew there was only one thing left to do. He walked slowly towards Samuel, not as a confident businessman, not as the loudest man in the room, but simply, Richard Collins stopped 3 feet in front of Samuel Brooks. For the first time in 12 years. He had no speech prepared, no clever remark, no confidence, only shame. The applause had faded. The crowd remained gathered around the lakeshore, but no one interrupted. Everyone seemed to understand that another important moment was about to unfold. Richard looked at the old man he had humiliated only 2 days earlier. Samuel's denim shirt was still damp from the lake. His boots were covered with mud. His gray hair clung loosely to his forehead. There was nothing about him that looked powerful, nothing except the quiet dignity that no insult had managed to take away. Richard lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." The words barely escaped his lips. Samuel waited patiently. Richard swallowed hard. "No, I'm not sorry because everyone found out who you are." His voice trembled. "I'm sorry because I never cared enough to find out." The sentence hung in the warm afternoon air. No one spoke. Richard continued. "I judged you by your truck, your clothes, your house. I thought success was something people could see." He laughed bitterly at himself. "I spent years teaching my children to respect money, while they were learning character from you." His shoulders shook. "I called you a useless old man." He looked Samuel directly in the eyes. "I've never been more ashamed of anything I've ever said." For several long seconds, Samuel remained silent. The silence made Richard even more uncomfortable. Finally, the old man stepped forward, not to lecture him, not to embarrass him, not to remind him of every cruel word. Instead, he placed one weathered hand gently on Richard's shoulder. "When I was young," Samuel said softly, "I thought strength meant winning every argument." Richard listened without moving. "Then life taught me something better." He smiled gently. "The strongest people aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones willing to admit them." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Samuel nodded. "Maybe not." The answer startled everyone. Then Samuel continued. "But forgiveness was never about deserving. It's about deciding that bitterness has taken enough from both people." Richard finally broke. He embraced his father-in-law with both arms. The tears he had fought all afternoon came freely now. "I'm so sorry." Samuel returned the embrace. "I know." Those 2 words carried no anger, only peace. Around them, several people quietly wiped away tears. Even the deputies looked away to give the family a moment that belonged only to them. Emily approached slowly. She wrapped both arms around her father, then around her husband. For the first time in years, the 3 of them stood together without tension between them. Lily hurried forward next. "So," she smiled through happy tears, "does this mean Grandpa's still taking me fishing next Saturday?" Samuel laughed. "The fish already asked me to cancel." "What did you tell them?" "I said my granddaughter always wins." Lily grinned. "Good answer." Duke would never hear the story. The old dog was probably asleep beneath the porch swing by now. Samuel smiled at the thought. Life had a way of returning to ordinary moments. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of all. Sheriff Daniel Carter waited until the family stepped apart. Then he approached once more. This time he held something wrapped in dark blue velvet. "I have one last thing." Samuel immediately shook his head. "Daniel, no more ceremonies." Daniel smiled. It isn't a ceremony. It's something that should have happened 35 years ago. He unfolded the velvet cloth. Inside rested a newly restored silver deputy's badge. The original badge Samuel had carried before retiring. Years earlier, it had been damaged in storage. The department had quietly restored it. Polished, repaired, mounted with care. Daniel held it respectfully in both hands. "We found your original badge. We thought it deserved to come home." Samuel stared at it for several moments. His fingers trembled slightly as he accepted it. The polished silver reflected the afternoon sunlight. For an instant, he wasn't 72 anymore. He was 29, standing beside his first patrol car. Eleanor smiling proudly as she pinned that very badge onto his uniform. "I was so afraid you'd lose this." She had laughed. Samuel had answered, "I won't." He had been wrong. Tom had taken many things. But somehow, the badge had found its way back. He closed his fingers around it. "Thank you." Daniel shook his head. "No, sir. Thank you." Several weeks later, Oak Ridge County Community Center overflowed with people. Not because of politics, not because of celebrity, but because of one quiet old man. A simple wooden sign stood near the entrance. The first annual Samuel Brooks Community Service Award. Samuel had argued against attending. Daniel had insisted, "You don't have to give a speech." "I wasn't planning to." When his name was announced, the entire auditorium stood. Not because someone instructed them, because respect sometimes rises before people even realize they're standing. The applause lasted nearly 2 minutes. Samuel looked embarrassed, exactly as everyone expected. Daniel stepped to the podium. "I've learned something these past few weeks." He looked across the audience. "We often celebrate the loudest people, the richest, the most famous. But communities aren't held together by those who seek attention." He turned toward Samuel. "They're held together by ordinary people who quietly decide to help." Every eye in the room settled on the old man seated in the front row, still wearing simple clothes, still driving the same faded pickup, still planning to repair Mrs. Wilson's fence the following Monday. Nothing about Samuel's life had changed, except one thing. Now everyone finally saw him. Months passed, then years. Children who received the Samuel Brooks Award grew into adults who volunteered in food banks, coached little league teams, rebuilt homes after storms, and quietly cared for elderly neighbors. Some of them never met Samuel, yet all of them knew his story. Not because he had wanted fame, but because Sheriff Daniel Carter refused to let true character disappear into forgotten archives ever again. One autumn afternoon, Lily, now preparing for college, sat beside her grandfather on the familiar porch swing. The same old farmhouse, the same gentle breeze moving through the maple trees. She asked the question she'd been saving for years. "Grandpa, if you knew everyone would eventually find out, would you still have stayed quiet all those years?" Samuel looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. Its warm light spread across fields ready for harvest. After a long silence, he smiled. "If helping someone only matters when people notice, then you were never really helping them." Lily nodded slowly. She would remember those words for the rest of her life. Samuel leaned back. The porch swing creaked softly beneath them. Duke's favorite spot beneath the steps now lay empty. The old dog had passed away the previous winter. Eleanor was still gone. Many old friends were gone too. Yet somehow, Samuel didn't feel alone. He looked toward the county road. A sheriff's patrol SUV drove past the farmhouse. As it reached the mailbox, the deputy behind the wheel slowed. He removed one hand from the steering wheel, raised it in a respectful salute. Samuel smiled, then returned the gesture with a small tip of his worn baseball cap. No sirens, no speeches, no cameras. Just two people who understood that respect needed no audience. The patrol vehicle continued down the road. Samuel watched until it disappeared beyond the trees. Then he looked toward Lily. "Ready to check the fishing lines?" She smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." Together they walked toward the lake. One step slow, one step young, neither leading, neither following. Simply walking side by side. As the evening sun settled over Oak Ridge County, The story that had begun with cruel words ended exactly where Samuel had always hoped every story would end. Not with revenge, not with humiliation, but with understanding. Because the greatest legacies are rarely built in front of crowds. They're built quietly, one kind decision at a time. Quiet moral respect is never demanded by the loudest voice. It is quietly earned by the life you choose to live, especially when no one is watching. In law who had been terribly, unforgivably wrong.